Warhammer World, we discuss the Rhino tank, which we have tracked down. At Warhammer World, once we looked over the Rhino tank, we then moved on to getting hammered.
Hello and welcome back to another episode. I'm Luke, the Crazy Maker Nerd. Today, we're going to be using up parts left over from my Stag Do up to Sherwood Forest and Warhammer World. More specifically, wooden cutlery, a costume helmet, and a Soulblight Gravelords commemorative coin. So, a few weeks ago I went on to my Stag Do, where I was made to wear a helmet around Warhammer World whilst we played Warhammer 40k in hero mode. So, I've now got a helmet. In the evening we had barbecues and there was disposable cutlery, and whilst at Warhammer World I might have spent enough to get the free commemorative coin twice. So, I've now got a collection of components that I can use to make some form of terrain, because going through the Warhammer World diorama section, let's just say I was very inspired. My initial idea is to try and make some sort of fallen statue, and then using all of the wooden cutlery to make some form of usable stairway and terrain on it, kind of like some kind of platform, some kind of fortification, but we'll see how this piece develops because I'm just going to kind of improv this one.
So I pulled out an MDF square and began by trimming off all of that fuzz from the top of the helmet. I also removed the pips that used to hold on a visor. Now I tried to work out which angle I wanted the helmet to sit on, and straight away I knew I needed to cut a small angle off of it and then glue it down to start the project. I also knew that I wanted the Soulblight Gravelords logo to be on the front using this coin, but I didn't want to sacrifice this coin. So I decided to pull out some blue stuff, submerge it in boiling water, and then push the Soulblight coin into it. We were doing this to make a mould. So, once it was completely formed, we removed it from the hot water. Then, we pulled the original coin out and mixed up the acrylic resin mixture by Green Stuff World using some water. Then, of course, pouring it into the mould and then setting it aside. We'll come back to this later. Next up, I thought I would try a bit of an experiment. Now, I had an idea that if I was to use kitchen roll and some super glue, I might be able to form some form of face underneath the helmet. So I began by gluing these pieces in place. Then I had a brainwave. What if I used the same acrylic resin that I used for the recasting for some form of like resin-based paper mache? So I mixed up some more of the resin, a little bit more watery than normal, and pre-soaked strips of kitchen roll that I'd already made into it, and then placed it to try and sculpt some form of face and back of the neck. Let's hope this dries properly. I found the mixture to work quite well and did actually hold in a similar way to normal paper mache, but my hope was it would last a bit longer and be maybe a little bit more water resistant, as most of my terrain lives in the loft at the moment. As it's acrylic resin, it actually dried in about half an hour, so I got out the Mod Podge and the sand. And of course, I just brushed Mod Podge all over the base as per normal, sprinkling sand as I went. If you would like to learn more about how to use sand for basing, go check out my other video, where I cover how to use sand and a number of different paints to essentially imitate every single texture paint Games Workshop currently sells. Once the base was finished, I sprayed on some matte Scenics spray and sprinkled on a small amount of sand onto the helmet. This is so later on it will resemble stone. Back to the Soulblight Gravelords coin recast. Let's pull that out, trim it a bit, and then stick it onto the front of the helmet. using super glue to fill in the seam between the coin and the helmet itself. Don't forget to clean your hobby space in between steps. Now let's crack out the wood cutlery. I knew straight away that I wanted to make some form of platform, but I wasn't quite sure where or how. So I made one small section of platform and kind of just held it in various places to try and work it out. I also wasn't certain how I want to elevate these platforms, so I got out of the spare pieces and tried to work that one out too. After some fiddling, I finally decided to use some small matchsticks cut down underneath the first platform to elevate it as if it's standing on stilts. I duplicated this effect for the second platform, but then for the third I decided it'd be a good idea to have cantilever struts instead. Once most of the, let's call them stair platforms, were done, I had to start making the big top panel. So I cut a load down and stuck them together. Now this was definitely the right idea, but it was too narrow, so then added more to the width. Trimmed down the edges so it's nice and square-ish. And then finally stuck it down to the top of the helmet. Now of course I did need to add some fake supports underneath to make it look less like it was stuck to the top of the helmet with super glue. So I cut down some offcuts, found some bits and bobs, and basically bodged it together to make it look quite, I don't want to say orky, but rough and ready. Now I've got all of these fork heads that I've just not used, so I figured let's line them all up, stick them together and turn them into this little barrier to stick down to the top of the platform. Yeah, I like how that looks. I also then realised that unless these guys are super tall, they probably would need some kind of ramp, so I added that on as well. And tidy up time. It's time to get out that spray booth. Now, the first coat here is very simple. Basically, I use Citadel Grey Sear all over the helmet because this is one of the best paints to use with a contrast paint afterwards. This technique is something that I've pulled across for all of my statue miniatures. So, just to make it all in keeping, let's carry on with that. At this point I also noticed a large panel gap on the helmet, so I decided let's make it into dripping blood, almost as if this is some kind of storage container for the Soulblight Gravelords. Next up, my favourite brown paint for mud, Rhinox Hide, comes out and I coat the entire base in this colour. Also, I forgot to base the bottom of this in black, so let's just put brown around the rim instead. Looking over the helmet, I also noticed that the screw bosses for the top of the helmet were kind of obvious, so I mixed up some green stuff and sculpted it into the holes. Then, straight away whilst it's still drying, painted it over in more grey sear. Once that was all dry, I moved on to using Gryph-Charger Grey all over the statue. Once again, this is the same colour I used on all my other statue models, so I'm using it to solely be in keeping with the rest of those. I very unimaginatively then used wild wood contrast paint all over the wooden structure. This paint is utterly brilliant at soaking into real wood and making it look like, well, real wood, but on a bigger scale.
I then did a little bit of touching up using the grey sear on the rocks next to the structure. And then I moved on to doing some detail work using Retributor armour on that recast coin, which I've mounted to the front of the helmet. And now for the fun bit, the weathering. Firstly, slimy green grime comes out and I start dabbing it all over using a sponge, trying to emulate rough spots where moisture would be trapped on the model. I then moved on to the similar technique using moss and lichen, this time hitting all of those areas where it would likely have grown. This time focusing mainly on the wooden structure to try and give it a little bit of je ne sais quoi and extra texture. Now to add some looks of rot around the wood, I used Bell Tan Green. This was then followed up with some Nuln Oil to get into all those nooks and crannies and really put out some depth. Now using Mod Podge and green flocking, I go around and add some textured moss to the base of the statue as well as the top of the helmet, hopefully covering up that seam that's still visible and making that coin on the front look a little bit more as part of the piece. Out next is the World War Scenics static grass applicator, which I use all over the base of the model. This works with a 9-volt battery which produces an electrical charge. You hold one point onto the wet PVA and the other part of the charge is inside the nozzle. As you shake it, the grass applies and stands upright because of that charge. Don't forget to tap that base, get all that loose stuff off. Out comes my vast collection of fake foliage. Firstly, we're going to apply some large white flowers to the front of the statue right next to the rocks. I'm then going to wedge in some fake moss at the top of the structure, trying to make it look like it's growing out from underneath. Next up, some autumn vines, which I'm going to wrap around various parts of the lower structure, almost as if they're growing from the ground and crawling up. I also added some red foliage near the front. I then used Bell Tan Green to stain some of the moss at the top to give it a bit of colour variety. I then sprayed the entire structure in some matte Scenic spray and covered it in fake autumn leaves. So there we go. A gimmick from my Stag Do turned into wargaming terrain for Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Fantasy, Old World, or Dungeons and Dragons. I'm quite happy with it, and it's going to be amazing to have a piece that always reminds me of my Stag Do. Have you ever used a piece of costume to make a piece of wargaming terrain? If you have, let me know in the comments section below. I would love to find out how you used it and what you use it for. Also, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe and bell icon so you know when the next video will come up. But until next time, I'll see you later, my nerds.
What are you still doing here? Go build some stuff.